There, it just came through the popped up. It's gone live. So it came through on Facebook. There, it just came through the popped up. Scott,
Yes.
does Danielle spell her the same last name the same way Tippy does or did?
Exactly the same. I don't know if she has any. I don't know how big the D'Auria family is, But one of my dearest friends was a guy named Tippy D'Auria down in Miami, Florida, is where he lived for a long time.
How did he spell it? With an O?
Same exact way.
Oh, same exact way. Yeah. Yeah, there's quite a few D'Aurias around. Mine all, like my family all came over to New York. So we're all from kind of based in New York, but then splintered and spread across the country.
What nationality is it? Is it Italian?
It's Italian, yeah.
Okay.
His formal name was Matthew D'Auria. We've got Mike Wiesner saying howdy from windy, cloudy Arizona. And the dad frequency says hello, Mike, Scott, and crew. Spacetime with Robert says hello, all from Bellingham, Washington. Norm Hughes says good afternoon. Where's Norm from? Is he in?
Norm, I can look him up real quick. I've drawn a blank. He's fairly close.
Tulsa? Is
No.
that right? He says Tulsa.
Yes, Tulsa. Yeah, I won't say where, but we'll just say Tulsa.
Good guess on my part.
I was thinking Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law lives where you live, Norm. Hey, Norm, have you ever been up to the Tall Grass Prairie north of Pawhuska? What platform is he watching on today? I don't see him on.
Norm's on YouTube.
He's on YouTube. Okay. I'm watching Facebook.
Yeah.
What's the weather where you guys are today?
66 and sunny.
Wow.
Spectacular.
We had a sunny day, but it was in the 20s, and we just got snow yesterday. So
I love to hear people say we had a sunny day. Like that's like people in Seattle going, when people in Seattle say they have a sunny day, it's a sunny day.
Yes. I used to live in Western Washington. I appreciated the sun when it shone.
So it's supposed to be Saturday night, low of 29, 48 and 29. And then back up into the 50s and 30s, 60s and 40s, 70. Tuesday next week, 70 and 61. It's not supposed to be this way. It's supposed to be cold. You know, we had, I think it was 6 or 7 years we went with zero snow here, which is, you know, growing up, there was always plenty of snow.
Hello, everybody. This is Scott Roberts from Explore Scientific, and with us today is Danielle D'Auria and Kent Martz. Kent will give a more thorough introduction than what I have, but we're really excited to have Danielle on today to talk about, I guess, a particular blue heron. So
Yeah, birds in general, but a specific blue heron. Danielle is a wildlife biologist for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. I stumbled upon her when I saw something on social media about a blue heron a specific blue heron that migrated from the Northeast United States, or maybe even Canada, went on a Caribbean vacation, a sustained cruise to the Bahamas, and then down into the sunny Caribbean. So Danielle, go ahead and tell us a bit more about yourself and your job, and let's get into this specific science. We're going away from our normal format into a science format. So go ahead. Nice to have you on and to see you on Facebook.
Well, great. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here and to share with you what we've been doing and learning. So I'm a wildlife biologist with Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and I specifically study birds for the state, and then specifically wetland birds. So including birds like the Great Blue Heron, but I also focus on loons and secretive marsh birds and black terns, other wading birds as well. So my focus is understanding statewide populations of those species. And so we've been looking at Great Blue Herons since 2008 in detail, trying to understand how their population is doing in Maine.
And so that led you to start thinking about where they migrate and the effects it has on the populations of those birds, because they're wading birds. And in Maine, after a certain point, there's probably not a whole lot of wading going on inland for sure. So they migrate. So talk about how you got into, tracking specific birds.
Sure. So our first question was how are they doing statewide? So we've seen some declines going on our coast. So the birds, the Great Blue Herons who nest on our coastal islands, have really plummeted over since the 1980s. So we were wondering if that decline was going on statewide. So back in 2009, we started monitoring all the colonies we could find, mostly with the help of volunteers. But then, as you start studying a bird or any species or anything really, you start to realize how much you don't know about something. So all these new questions come up. And one of the things that we were wondering is just, some more fine level details about their movements. And primarily we focus on what's going on in our state, being the state wildlife agency, but it's really important to also consider their full annual cycle of birds. So where are they going in the winter? How are they getting there? What routes are they taking? Where do they stop? Are there problems going on elsewhere outside of our little jurisdiction here that could be affecting our birds?
Sure. So it could be that specific shore colony is going to some specific spot on a small group of islands, and habitat destruction disrupted them. And so the reaction is you don't have as many birds showing up to roost on the shore of, the Atlantic Ocean. And so, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, So what have we found out?
Well, right now, we're still kind of in preliminary phases, but we've tagged about 9 Great Blue Herons with GPS transmitters, and some of those, we haven't gotten reliable data from because sometimes the technology doesn't work or the birds end up dying, which is a natural process. But we've been learning where they go, and we kind of knew they go south. We figured maybe to Florida or somewhere warm, but we've been discovering that they go as far as Haiti and Cuba and the Bahamas, and now we're seeing how they get there, and they're actually flying pretty long distances over the open ocean, which I don't think many people think of a Great Blue Heron as, this long distance flyer going, over the open ocean for sometimes close to 68, 70 hours. So,
it's easy to imagine just sort of taking a leisurely journey to, Jersey and then, South Carolina, and then work their way down into Florida and just sort of just, I guess crow hop or blue heron hop, but turns out that's not the case. Now you have a PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
You want to jump into that? Is now a good time or?
Sure thing. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Get that going here. Let's see. Where's my share? And I'll start my show. Okay. So I will just go through kind of briefly just about Great Blue Herons. I know most people know what Great Blue Herons are, but it's kind of neat to focus in on them and understand, some of their characteristics. They're our largest wading bird in North America. And that means that they're as tall as 3 to 4 feet, and they have a wingspan of up to 6 feet. But despite their size, they're actually lightweight. They're only 5 to 6 pounds at the most. So they're really just a bunch of feathers and very lightweight bones, and not a lot of meat to them. They average about 15 years for their lifespan. And most of us can identify a Great Blue Heron, but there are field marks. So birders out there know to look for the black and white crown of the adults, these plumes that come off of their chest and their back during the breeding season primarily, that are used for kind of communication and attracting mates. And sometimes we do get odd birds like the gray heron, which looks very similar to a Great Blue Heron, and that's a European Asian species. So it's kind of neat to key in on what are some of the field marks of a Great Blue Heron, because I think some of us take it for granted. And then, of course, these guys are not in the songbird family for a reason. Their voice is mostly squawking, but they actually do some other calls, especially when when mates communicate with each other. They will sometimes do kind of a howling sound at the colony when they greet each other. And then the young also do a chattering. So I'm just going to play some calls for you guys. Hopefully you can hear that.
We can hear it.
Almost like a growl.
I called them ox when I was a kid for the sound they made.
That's a good term. Yeah, so you mostly hear a lot of those sounds at the colony, other than their squawks. They live primarily in North America, the US, going up into Canada, but also down into Central America and like the Antilles Islands and Cuba and Haiti. They nest typically in colonies, although we do have sites where they nest singly, where it's just one pair, one nest at the site. And in Maine, this is what a typical nest site looks like. They like these beaver flowages where they have protection of the water around their nest tree. And that kind of deters predators like raccoons and other mammals from swimming out to the trees and climbing up and getting to the young or the eggs. They'll also nest in live trees though. So this is an example of an upland site that's in live white pines. And you can kind of see the nest. They're little gray dots at the top of these trees. Mm-hmm. And some of our larger colonies in Maine are actually in these kinds of settings.
Danielle, is that a homes nearby that you can see in the upper corner of that picture?
Yeah, so they actually, it's interesting. Some sites, birds are really skittish and don't want to be near people, and others, they tend to tolerate people pretty well. So I think as long as the people in those homes aren't kind of crossing into their colony boundary during the nesting season, then they're fine with that level of proximity. We also have them, I mentioned, on our coastal islands, and that's where we've seen our big decline go on. And I'll show you some numbers from that. But this is a typical coastal island with some really, mostly spruce, sometimes some yellow birch in there. But they used to nest in large numbers on our islands. And when they nest in these colonies, they often build multiple nests in one tree. So these are different pairs building these nests. And the idea of nesting in a colony and this close together, they have kind of the protection of many eyes. So they are all looking out for danger and kind of helping each other out in that sense.
So it takes a village.
Yes. And so during incubation, so here in Maine, and it varies across the country as to the timing, but here in Maine, birds will be returning sometime by early to mid-April, and they usually are incubating by early May. So the only way you know they're even there is when they stand up to roll their eggs or the mate comes in and they switch duties. But you can kind of see their heads just peeking out over the nest. So despite being 3 to 4 feet tall, they can fold themselves up and get down into that nest to the point where you can barely see them from the edge of their colony.
So Danielle, how big are those nests across? A couple of feet?
Yeah, they're probably maybe 2.5, 3 feet across. They're very similar to osprey nests, if anybody's familiar with those, maybe a little smaller. Sometimes they're a little flimsier than an osprey nest would be, but they are pretty significant size. So once they hatch, it takes about 28 days for them to incubate. They hatch out as these fuzzy little nestlings that are pretty helpless. But amazingly, they grow from, their eggs are only the size of maybe a chicken egg, and they grow from that size of a nestling to an adult size before they can fly in about 60 to 80 days. So they stay in that nest until they can fly, which is a long time. And they have anywhere between 2 to 5 young, very typically. It can get pretty crowded in those nests once they get to be the age of, close to fledging. This picture shows an adult who's standing upright, and then there's 2 young here where you can tell with their gray crown.
They all live in that nest.
Yeah, and sometimes you have even more nestlings in that size nest. So sometimes they fall out because there's just not enough room. One nudges another one, they lose balance, and that's unfortunately the death of them. So it can be kind of treacherous. But one of the cool things that they do, if you ever watch a colony, the young will actually grab a hold of the adult's bill, which is what one of them is doing here, and yank its neck down into the nest, and then the adult will regurgitate its food. It's kind of like a stimulus for the adult to regurgitate the food so that the nestling can then eat. But it's kind of neat to watch that.
All the grays and blues and blacks make it hard to tell what's bird and what's tree and everything else.
Yeah,
I was really having to study that picture.
I know they do a good job of camouflage in that case. So here in Maine, we started really looking at our birds back in 2007, 2008. We actually listed them as a state species of special concern here because we were seeing declines, I mentioned, on our coast. And then we also saw declines on our breeding bird survey counts of herons. So we really just wanted to kind of study them closer and make sure that there's nothing going on to worry about. The way we started doing this was first doing aerial surveys and checking all of our historic colonies that we ever knew about, and then finding new ones. But we realized the state of Maine is pretty large, and there's a lot of potential habitat for great blue herons here because we have a lot of wetlands. So we decided we needed help. And in order to get help, we enlisted lots of volunteers. So we have a network of volunteers called the Heron Observation Network, and they help us monitor colonies. They've been doing that since 2009. And they go out during the breeding season and they count how many nests and whether there's birds using each of those nests. And then they can tell us also if there's any nestlings towards the end of the season and how productive they were. And this has helped us tremendously get a feel for what's going on with the herons here. So this graph kind of just shows both the statewide population based on the data that we've collected, which is in blue, and then our inland population separated out, and then our coastal population separated out. And really, we're still seeing a declining trend primarily in the coast, but statewide, it's also declining, just not to the same degree. And this just zeroes in on our coastal colonies. So we had as many as 1,200 pairs back in the 80s, and now we're down to only 129 on those coastal islands. So we've really seen a decline there, and trying to get an understanding of why and whether that's going on statewide. And really what we've seen is that some of those birds have actually moved inland, but there's still some declines going on inland as well. We don't know why, but on the coast, we have a burgeoning bald eagle population that is definitely a potential predator of herons. We've had evidence that they do predate on herons. And so I think them using the same islands as for nesting is not a good thing for herons. So I think they need to kind of move elsewhere in order to be safe during the breeding season.
I guess when you're a bald eagle, everything looks like supper.
Yeah, yes. They're opportunists, and if they're going to be nesting near a great blue heron, then why not go for that for dinner? It's right there, easy pickings. So I mentioned, once you start studying something, you come up with more and more questions. So we wanted to look more at where are they going? How are they moving around? How are they using the landscape? And so these are some of the things that we can look at by using technology like GPS transmitters. We can look at all of these things I've listed here: foraging distances, their home range, how often are they switching colonies, and then of course their migration and where do they go in the winter. So we started this back in 2016, where we started with an initial 5 transmitters that we put out. They're solar powered, so they're supposed to last multiple years. And so far we have one that's still going. So that's 6 years plus. And we involved students at all stages of this project. So they helped us in the field, and now they're learning from the birds by following their movements online. So the way that we trapped and tagged these herons is kind of interesting. And it's one of those things that I didn't think I'd ever do because I thought they'd be a challenge to be able to capture. Because they can be really skittish here. They don't seem to tolerate people that much, especially when you try to get close to them. So we targeted them where they forage instead of at their nesting locations. We didn't want to disturb them while nesting. So we had our students going out and looking for foraging herons on the landscape. And once they found some good spots where they saw herons feeding, then we set out to do some baiting. So we use these cement mixing tubs where we drill lots of holes in them so that the water can flow freely. But we put them in a shallow water and then stock them with fish. So it's like this hyper stocked little pool of fish that are easy pickings for a heron. So we caught like lots of minnows, bait fish, put them in there, and then wait for herons to come find them and take advantage of them. So once the herons realize this is an easy meal, they come back every day, and sometimes multiple times a day, to that bait bin. And we monitor the bait bin with game cameras. And so you can see we had at least three birds in that top photo hanging out near our bait bin. And then on the bottom photo, you can see a heron actually standing on the edge of the bait bin, leaning over to catch some fish.
So I have to ask, I hope that tire is part of the trap mechanism.
It is. It actually, this was a pretty fast moving stream here, and it actually was an alewife run as well. So the herons were kind of there for the alewives originally, but then once the alewife run petered out, they stayed because we had provided them with some bait fish.
Tell our viewers what an alewife is.
It's an anadromous fish that migrates up into lakes. Well, it migrates out of lakes to spawn. I get it confused as to which direction they go for what purpose, but they're a really important forage fish for a lot of fish eaters in Maine. Osprey, herons, eagles, cormorants, when there's an alewife run, so their migration, either going upstream or downstream, there's birds there. And we, in fact, while we were trying to trap at this site, we had herons and osprey and eagles all very close to us, diving in, going after some of these alewife fish. So they're a really important resource here and something that we're constantly trying to restore connectivity so that they can freely migrate up and down.
So I just looked it up. They migrate to fresh water to spawn.
Okay, so it's
And
that.
then-
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And they're and they are a herring.
Yes, they are a type
Okay,
of heron.
good.
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah. So so once we have birds kind of using our bait bins regularly, and we know this from our game cameras, then we set out to trap them. So we actually use modified foothold traps, which they look like, jaw traps, but they do not have, they just have padding on them. They're actually gapped so that when the jaws close, there's a gap for their leg. And we put anywhere from 2 to 3 dozen of these traps around that bait bin that they were getting used to feeding out of, so that the next time they come, when we're watching, they will step in a trap as they go towards the bait bin.
And you can see those traps in that left-hand picture. There's an
Yeah.
arc of them right there, right? That's not just mud or something. Those are the traps.
Yeah, so this is our process of setting them, and we try to, every site's different. We try to camouflage them a little bit because the birds, they can pick up on these little changes and details. So sometimes we have vegetation that we put around them just to try to hide them as well. But we hide in little blinds. Sometimes we sit in a truck. It just depends on the setting, and wait until a bird steps in the trap. Oh, there's a close-up of a trap. And so they step on that pedal and it closes around their leg. And as soon as it does, we run out there and get it out of the trap and secure it, and then start measuring it.
So it's just a standard trap that any fur bearer trapper would be using. You're just using it because they all by law now have to have that gap so you don't break the bone. So it's just a standard trap at this point, right? Nothing special.
Yeah, we actually modify it even further. We use lighter springs so that the amount of force when it closes is even less. And then we also gap it even more just to make sure that there is enough room for the leg to be in there without causing injury. And we haven't had any injuries at all. And we've had other people using the same methods and there's never been an injury. It's amazing how, even though they're lightweight birds and they're kind of just feathers and bones, they're pretty strong, hardy birds too. So this is us getting one out of a trap in the wetland, and there it is with its beak in our hand. So once we take all the measurements, we take a blood sample to tell the sex because we can't identify males from females just in the field. We also measure the wing chord and the beak length, all those typical bird measurements. But we then put the transmitter on, which this is what it looks like. It's a little box, about 2 inches long, 1 inch wide, 1 inch high, has a couple antennas sticking out of it, and then that solar panel on the back. And it goes on like a backpack with Teflon ribbon, which is really strong material. And then once we have it all secure, we release the bird and it's on its way. This is one that we named Nokomis. So the students that we work with name all the birds. This kind of gives them a little better connection to the birds, and just gives them a fun way to connect. So that was Nokomis from the Nokomis High School students who helped us. And so once we release the birds, then we can start learning where they're going. So every night at 6 p.m., the transmitter connects through the cell tower network in the area and downloads all the data from the last 24 hours
Very
to
cool.
a website called MoveBank. And then anybody can go online and look at where our birds have been throughout the study.
So that's MoveBank, MoveBank.
Yeah, so I have it on this slide here, and there's actually 2 different ways you can check up on our birds. Move Bank, the actual website, you can go in, and I have instructions on the Maine Heron Observation Network's blog as far as how to like filter out and get to our study. But there's also a smartphone app, of course. There's an app for that, and it's called Animal Tracker. And everything looks pretty similar on that app as well, and you can put in which bird you want to look at. And this is just shows one of our birds, Snark, who wintered in Florida. And this is the same exact representation of the data just on the website versus the app. But you could see this bird, he would go to roost on an island in the middle of this river, but then use everybody's little docks and these little canals next to their houses, and sometimes would go up on people's lawns and drink out of their swimming pools and so forth. So kind of neat to see that. That's not what they do here in Maine. So these are all our high-tech waders, the ones that we've captured and tagged. These are the original 5. Snark, Nokomis is a female, Snark is a male, Mellow's a female, Cornelia is a female, and Sedgy was a male. Snipe was a male, Warrior was a female, and Easton's Baby Blue was a female. And then our latest 2, Harper was tagged in 2019, she's a female, and Ragged Richard was tagged this past year, 2021, that he's a male, obviously. And so
it looks to be the most important task, I'm going to guess, is the person who holds onto the beak.
Yes.
That person is
that
person is a valuable, like if they don't like you, just let go of the beak and it's going to be pretty, I suspect.
It's rare that you will see a picture of people holding a heron without somebody holding the beak, because then, yeah, it can be very dangerous. So that is the ultimate job. Yes, always somebody has to have their hand on it. And we often give it, one person, this is your sole job this whole morning. Hold this beak. Do not let go. They will strike at anything that's moving. And I've heard stories of people handling herons, and thankfully the person had glasses on, and because the heron went straight for their eyeball because it was moving. So definitely need to be careful. So some of the information we can get from these tags is kind of like just the timing and duration for for each of their seasons. When are they breeding, their post-breeding period, and then their migration and wintering, and then again their spring migration back, and so forth. So that's just an example to see. We can look at variability amongst individuals and then look at patterns as well. So this is just like all the points that we've collected from our birds so far, from 2016 to 2021. And so you can see some of our birds actually went north to Canada, and they obviously have gone south and taken all different paths to get south, if you look at how far east and west they went. So that's just a summary of their movements. So I thought I'd zoom in on some of the birds and just other stuff that we can learn from them. This is Sedgy, who he nested in a colony in a town called Bradley, and that is this concentration of points here. This is outside of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bangor, Maine, or the University of Maine at Orono. Orono's right over here. But this is his colony, and he would use this stream during the breeding season pretty heavily for foraging. And so we can look at, the acreages they use for foraging, and look at some of the hot spots. So the orange is kind of his favorite spot to feed. But then we can also, and then look at the distance he's going to feed. So at least 2 miles. Of course, some of these other spots are further away from his colony. But then after the breeding season, how do their movements change? He used a lot less area, so he only used half of that same segment of the stream, but still had this favorite foraging spot here. So it's kind of neat to see what they do and some of the details. Cornelia was a female who nested down in Gray, which is just about a half hour north of Portland, Maine. And she actually flew a greater distance to where she liked to forage. I think that was about, let's see, I have it on here, 6.5 miles, yep, to her foraging area. And she used a smaller area for foraging. And so that kind of gives us the question was where she was foraging this really rich habitat that just provided so much that she didn't need to use a bigger area. We don't know, but those are the kinds of questions that come up. And then
Scott, hang on. Speaking of questions, Scott, get ready because I know you've got a couple of questions. Danielle, let's find a stopping point here at some point. So we
sure,
can
no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just finish with Cornelia. She then at post-breeding would go as far as she went 18.5 miles to start using a whole different area. So yeah, we can stop. You want me to stop sharing?
No, you don't have to. You can keep it here. That's fine. Or stop. Go ahead and stop. And let's
maybe just a little pause. We had a couple of questions. I have a question. I'm reading that Maine seems to have some very strict guidelines on preserving birds, and it's made it unlawful to hunt, kill, possess, transport, buy, or sell any wild bird. I don't know if this is a common nationwide kind of thing, or is that special to Maine?
I think it's pretty common. I mean, we do have hunting seasons for certain species. So we have waterfowl that are hunted. We have turkey and grouse. There's all sorts of species that are legally hunted, and we have regulations for those. It's primarily all the other species that are, typically protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and other acts that are out there. So yeah, I think it's pretty common.
Okay. I'm certainly all for protecting as many birds as we can. With the population declines because of all kinds of reasons. Layering hunting or selling them. These wild species is really tough. So. But I wanted you to know also that I did pass on an article that had some of your photographs in it about wading birds. That looks like it's on the maine.gov website. And, you have been doing a lot of outreach work, which is wonderful, and much needed. One of the listeners said a friend of mine's son worked on the Northeast fishing boats, and his comment to her was that the northern Atlantic fish populations are full of cancer. And is there any science backing that perhaps by a heron eating a cancerous fish might pass on? Would that make cancer contagious? Yeah,
I haven't heard that specifically mentioned that they're full of cancer, but our fish populations are definitely in decline along the coast. And that's one thing that we think is happening. It's a pretty complex food web along our coast here in Maine, and there's all sorts of players. There's the fish-eating birds, but then there's birds that eat those fish-eating birds and so forth. And so one of the things that we've thought is, so what, there's bald eagles, but maybe they're just not finding enough other food and they're switching to something like herons as a prey item. And so that could be kind of, messing things up for the herons a little bit. And we've definitely seen with some of our seabirds, like puffins and terns having a hard time in certain years finding enough forage fish. So there's a lot going on in the Gulf of Maine as far as the fisheries, and there's definitely some pretty big issues there as far as the abundance and even like the areas are changing where they're using where
Okay.
the fish are found, and that's a lot tied to global warming and climate change and how the currents are changing and the temperature of the ocean is warming.
Yeah, it's creating all kinds of issues, that's for sure.
Them
That's being seen worldwide.
measuring that kind of data, I mean, it's almost impossible to envision all the data points in the food web of the shorebirds, and just a staggering amount of modeling, I guess, would have to go into that.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many different factors. There's weather, there's temperature, there's other things at play, whether it's harvest of different animals, whether it's rockweed or shellfish or some of these bottom feeding fish. So it's so interconnected.
Yes, that's true. Let's see, what other comments do we have here? Mike Wiesner is asking, he's watching on YouTube. He says, question, in your data reduction, have you checked weather conditions at various dates on the tracks across the ocean? Was it clear where a bird was so stars could be seen? Did they avoid hurricanes?
Yeah, so I haven't looked at the cloud cover for their flights, but that would be a great thing to try to tease out. We have looked at wind kind of speed and direction, and I have something in that PowerPoint that I'll show in a little bit that kind of shows, at least in relation to where the bird was, what the wind was doing at that time. And it kind of helps show how they actually took the specific path that they did. I mean, obviously they want to go south to a specific spot. The best path would be, or the quickest path would be a straight line, but
Sure.
they sometimes are curving out, to the east and then come back into the west. And I think a lot of that is due to the winds.
Riding the winds.
Okay,
Mhm.
so it's not like them avoiding light polluted areas or any of these kinds of things where, the habitat or the area might not be conducive as far as a fly zone.
So far, not necessarily. Like, so on their fall migration, that's when we've seen these migrations over the ocean, whereas in spring, they tend to follow the coast up a little bit more, and they stop a little more regularly on the mainland. So, and it's, pretty variable where they stop. It's not like they always stop in the same place. And even the timing of how long they're there is pretty variable. But we have a lot of data to look at and really tease apart some of that stuff.
All right. So I'm just very quickly, before you start sharing again, Jim Norwood, who lives in Tulsa. So two of our current viewers live within about 15 miles of each other, it looks like. So proving it is a small world. Let's see. Screen 2. So there's a
gorgeous
heron photo that Jim Norwood took somewhere probably around Tulsa, Oklahoma. Of just, the birds here tend to be very tolerant, at least when they're foraging and hanging out on people's docks and stuff. You see people who are getting 5, 6, 7 feet taking astounding close-ups of the birds, and they name them various names, and it's almost, the photographers say it's like they know them after 3 or 4 weeks of seeing on the dock day after that. It's like, oh, it's just Charles. He's not going to bother me any. And they become very, very tolerant. But again, they're not in their colony either, where they probably become very, very protective. But just a gorgeous picture of a big old bird,
And that's a beautiful adult. You can tell by the black and white on the head and the plumes coming off of the chest there.
It looks
right
huge.
here. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. They are huge. How long would they be fully extended toes to nose?
I think it's probably close to 5 feet if you string them out like that.
Yeah, probably similar to their wingspan, basically, would be my guess.
Right.
Yeah. So great picture. Thanks for sending that. And, I will say this is a good time to say, if you've got pictures of birds out there, people who are watching, feel free to email them to us. We'd love to use them in a future episode. Explore Alliance at explorescientific.com. It looks like Scott's probably posting that for you to see right now. So, all right.
Cool.
So go
Should I
ahead.
continue? All
Yeah,
right.
go ahead.
Yeah, this is very good.
We'll get into some of the more fun data here. I might, let's see. So this is our first bird that ever migrated. So we were extremely excited about this. This happened on September 1st of 2016, and this was Sedgy. And he is like the one bird out of all the birds we've tagged that literally took 5 days to get to his wintering area and 5 days to get back to Maine when he was ready to come back to breed. That's really quick compared to all our other birds. Sometimes they take 2 weeks to get to where they're going. He stopped along the way, but he was pretty much beelining it for his wintering area, which was in Florida.
So looking at this, on that day was a new moon. So there was no moon that day.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I would have
using the
thought
stars, maybe.
using the stars apparently would be my guess. I mean, I
Right.
just interested to see the magic of the internet. I just didn't know. I wish I could claim to know that off the top of my head, but no.
Well, and what's interesting is they do often leave at night. So we get our downloads around 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. depending on daylight savings, but they often are leaving around that time and flying all night long. So there's definitely an advantage to them for some reason, right? And it could be, using there's so many questions about migration and what birds are really keying in on. There's there's thoughts that there's sensors in their forehead. There's, they have an internal GPS or an internal compass, or they're using the stars. There's so many theories, and there's really no solid answers yet as far as how the birds are doing it. So this just shows like the initial wintering locations. And so far, this is where we've seen all of our birds go to these sites. The straight lines are not the path. It's just connecting. We didn't have data. Sometimes we don't get all the data. Technology is never perfect. So we have to just connect the dots there. Here's some tracks from spring migration, and you can see the dates. So Sedgy, again, like 5 days. He's like the marathon flyer as far as how fast he goes, but the others typically take 2 to 3 weeks sometimes, but this shows some pretty detailed tracks coming back.
So what year was this?
This was probably this was probably 2017. Because that was our first year that they did a spring migration.
So the 30th was the new moon was the 28th.
Oh, so
Okay.
still pretty dark.
Yeah. That's a great thing to key in on.
So not a relationship proven, but an interesting statistic.
Yes, for sure. And that's the kind of thing, like, we just have to keep thinking, okay, what else could be sparking them to go at this specific time? So we have looked a little bit at their timing and length of migration, and I need to do this again for some more recent data, but you can see the length in the days, it varies quite a bit. And then we do think weather can influence how long it takes them, because when there is a hurricane happening, especially in the fall, that's hurricane season. Sometimes they hunker down in a place for a while before getting going again. And it really does seem tied to the fact that there's storms going on. We definitely see patterns within individuals. So leaving practically on the same exact date year to year, and arriving on the same exact date, taking the same amount of time to get to where they're going. Kind of interesting there. But then we also see variability where we have birds like Sedgy, who flies really quick, gets to where he's going quickly, and compared to the others who take longer. And then the timing of their departure seems like in fall, it varies quite a bit from sometime in September through any time, like even as late as November, at least from our spots in Maine. Whereas in spring, they do tend to leave, at least our tag birds so far have all left their wintering areas sometime towards the end of March. Maybe that's because they are trying to get back to their breeding colonies, you know, quickly to claim their nesting spot.
Do they use the same? They don't use the same nest year after year. They're not. Are they that like bald eagles do?
They use the same colony year after year, usually. They might change their nest spot, but they typically return to their colony.
But not the same nest specifically.
They haven't shown that they go back to the same nest.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. There's probably some portion that do, but not all of them. So when it comes to their stopovers, you know, they stop several times as long as they're along the mainland. If they're going over open ocean, they're not stopping. And this does not include our open ocean flyers yet. So spring, they tend to stop more often. And then again, Sedgy, he was the quick one. He wasn't interested in stopping all that much. Other things that are interesting, so like looking at, you know, similarities, are there similarities between their stopovers? Are any of their stopovers used more than, you know, by more than one individual? Those are some things we want to look at. But then also Sedgy and Snark were pretty interesting because they nested only 10 miles apart in Maine, and they wintered only 25 to 30 miles apart in Florida. And the second year, Sedgy actually switched colonies and went to where Snark nested. They're both males, so they weren't paired, but it was just kind of like makes you think, are they cousins? Did they originate in the same colony? And, you know, somehow they learned the same place to go winter. Hard to know.
Are these birds monogamous?
Well, yes, during the nesting season, they have one mate, but they do switch mates year to year, potentially. So when they return to their nesting colonies, the males kind of choose the nest site, and then the females kind of choose the male. And so there could be mixing from year to year and different mates each year. There's been nothing showing that they mate with the same bird year after year. So this just shows some of their wintering spots. So this is in Florida. Vero Beach is where Snark was, and then Sedgy was in kind of a more agricultural area. And this photo is actually of Snark on somebody's deck in Florida. Wow. These birds definitely act differently when they're in their wintering areas compared to how they act here in Maine. This wouldn't happen in Maine, at least during the nesting season. And this is just a close-up of Sedgy's wintering area and Snark's. So pretty different there. One's very developed, one's not. And again, here's Snark on a buoy in the river. One of my volunteers.
How do you prove that's Snark?
Oh, because so we knew that Snark was hanging out in that area. He does have a leg band on. Right. But I have a volunteer here who winters in Florida, and he actually went in search of Snark, and he found, he saw him and photographed him for me.
That's awesome. So they're both snowbirds.
Yes, exactly. So Nokomis is one that went to Haiti, and we have another bird who went to Haiti as well, Ragged Richard. And this is kind of neat because she was using what we think is rice paddy plantation habitat. So you can see all those little squares on the photo. And the rice paddies plantations are pretty common for wading birds. There's a lot of fish and amphibians in there. But it's a very remote area. It's hard to find any information about this spot on the internet. So then we have Harper. So now I get into some fun information about some of our birds. So we tagged Harper in 2019 in a town called Harpswell on the coast. with the hope that we would get a coastal nesting bird. But so within the first 10 days, didn't look like she was nesting. So we thought, well, maybe she's, past her prime breeding age. We knew she was an adult. Or maybe she's a 2-year-old, not quite of nesting age yet. And so our hope was that she might nest in Harpswell the next year. But it turns out she had other plans. And there's an expression here in Maine called from away. So that means if you have not been raised, if your family hasn't been raised in Maine for 3 generations at least, then you are from away. You're not a Mainer unless you've had generations growing up here. So we thought she might be from away because she went straight up to northern New Brunswick from Maine, did a beeline, and started kind of exploring the coastline up there. And some of the areas she explored were actually known colonies, known nesting colonies. So we thought, well, maybe she's prospecting for a nesting site next year. And then we saw her migration. So her first tract migration in 2019 blew us away. So this was the first time we saw one of our birds go over the open ocean for 38 plus hours. And so she left, she went from Canada all the way down to Florida nonstop. And then she continued on to go to Cuba where she winters. But you can see here's some of her stats. So her flight speed during the open ocean flight was averaged about 38 miles per hour, which is faster than they usually fly around, like when they're around, where we live. They might go 20 miles an hour at their fastest, 12 miles an hour, but 38's getting up there. But they also went as fast, she also went as fast as 67. And that's definitely being helped by the wind.
That would be fascinating to go match up the data points with weather points to see how that affects speed and altitude.
Yeah, and so her altitude, it ranged from right over the ocean to over 3,000 feet. So there's quite a bit of variability there. And we saw some evidence of her kind of coasting. And I'll show you, let's see, I'm going to skip this. Well, here's another one of her wow migrations is she went, so in 2020, this isn't even this year's, she flew straight for 68 hours. So again, just blowing all our records away that we've been able to track so far. Similar averages as far as her speed and her height. But there was a big, there's a question like, is she stopping? Is she landing on a ship? Is she doing something to help her along? But we actually have accelerometer data from these transmitters, and it's like having a Fitbit on the bird, so we know her activity level. And you can see from when she left Quebec to when she arrived in Georgia, she was flying nonstop. And you can zoom in on this, and it's all nonstop flight.
Holy
so
smoke.
that's one way that we know she's not like hitching a ride on a ship or something, or just touching down on the water, which herons generally don't do anyway. The other thing I looked at was her altitude and speed along her path. And so the things to pay attention here are the larger the circle, the higher up she is. And the color, as you get more towards yellow, she's going faster. So the darker color is she's slower, but then the lighter color is faster. So it's just a quick representation of what she was doing during that flight, but we can start bringing in some of those weather variables and seeing how that influenced both her height and her speed. And this is something I did too. I pieced this together from Ventusky.com has these great maps where you can put in any time of day, you can put in the elevation, and you can see the wind currents. And so I'm going to play this little video that shows her migration and how the wind changed along her path, where she was at that time. And so you can kind of see how the winds shifted, and now they're pushing her back towards North America.
Incredible.
So then this year she blew us away again. So Harper is just, she's probably the most famous heron because she's made the news all over the place. But this year she went from Chaleur Bay, New Brunswick to Bermuda and stopped in Bermuda. And then continued on to the same exact wintering area again in Cuba. And this year she flew nonstop for 40 hours to Bermuda, and then she flew another 30 hours to the Bahamas, and then she kept going after, spending some time probably refueling after all those flights. But her 7-day journey covered over 2,000 miles, 2,130 miles.
Interesting.
And most of it.
October the 2nd was a 2-day-old moon.
Really? Okay. Yeah, I want to look at that more closely for sure now that you brought that up.
Those are the only ones I've checked. It could just be I happened to check the ones that were all on a new moon or close to a new moon. But it'd be interesting to go back and track each one of those just to see if there's a truly a pattern. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just amazing.
So this is where, just to give you an idea of where she is in Cuba, this is what her habitat looks like. And this is the last 2 weeks of her movements. This is how you can look at it on the app. It just gives you an idea of what that looks like. So anybody can go onto the app and kind of check on these birds each night and see where they've been and where they're going. So I'll show you.
Where's her roost site? Over here in these trees on the left?
I'm not sure. She seems to, she does concentrate a lot over here in this area. And so this might be where she roosts. But yeah, I know she uses this area quite a bit too. We'd have to look at the timing of each of those points. So then we have Ragged Richard, who also amazed us this year. So this was our first year tracking his migration, and he left a bit like almost a month later on the 28th of October, and he flew nonstop 47 hours to the Bahamas from Maine. So, we're seeing this more and more, and like we have a pretty small sample size. So I think this does happen more than we even know. These transoceanic flights or whatever you want to call them. So it's really neat to have another bird who's doing this and to see how he's going. I haven't looked at all of his data in detail yet, like I did with Harper, but I suspect we'll find some similarities there. And then his area, so he's in Haiti, and this is what his habitat looks like. And it's only about 8 miles from where Nokomis wintered. But this doesn't quite look like the rice paddy plantation habitat. This is more just some remote wetlands and kind of estuary habitat here. So this is his last 2 weeks of movements in Haiti. And making some pretty long flights going south and then back north again. So that's a few miles, 4 miles maybe, that he goes south and then back.
I find it interesting that they're in Haiti, which is pretty well deforested because of, the need for wood for fuel fires. Striking, you can see the border with Dominican Republic. It's interesting that they're in Haiti and not on the Dominican Republic side of the island.
Yeah, but they're in the wetlands, and that's, they don't really need the trees during wintering. They can roost on the ground if they want to, or on, in the wetland habitat. And the other thing is like all the birds need to be somewhere. I'm sure there are herons that are wintering in the Dominican Republic.
They're probably the New York birds go to the Dominican.
Yeah,
Republic.
maybe. So yeah, it's interesting that we have 2 birds now that are wintering in pretty similar areas. So that's kind of all I wanted to show you with the heron movements. I'm always looking for other students to get involved, even just to use the data in school projects. So students or teachers out there that are interested in diving into the data and understanding it better or using it in your classroom, I would love to chat with anybody who's interested in that. So I can,
This is what's been the most amazing thing of this research? Just the sheer distance they've traveled.
yeah, I think for me, it's thinking about these birds that we focus so much here in Maine. What are they doing here? What can we do to help them here? And it's like they go out, they leave, and they are just, they're in the world, right? They're in this big, huge world, and they're going so far. They are facing all different things. It could be storms along the way. It could be landing in, suboptimal habitats and development, near airports or something. So it's wild to think of what their life is away from here and how different it could be where they're wintering. I think you're muted.
Yes, we've done an episode on the program Birdcast, which works to forecast migrations and ask cities to dim or turn off as many lights as possible to keep the birds from getting caught in light traps, basically, and flying till exhaustion and running into buildings. And I know there's a lady in New York City that walks around a specific building in the World Trade Center complex and puts on Instagram the picture and count of every bird she picks up, dead bird she picks up every morning before the big traffic starts up. And it is truly staggering, the number of birds that die on one innocuous building in New York City. It just shows that how, once again, how tied together everything is. We're in a big web. And finding technology, smaller GPS sensors that can go on smaller birds, using next-rad radar to discern the difference between birds and bats and insects is just, there's so much more data available to people like you, and finding ways to slice it and dice it and pull out some data out of it, has to be a daunting task. And you talked about teachers in classrooms. Is there, citizen science programs that you utilize to help you reduce the data? I mean, there could be a science class in Bentonville, Arkansas that starts trying to tackle matching up flight with weather and moon phase and temperature and everything else. It's all out there in the archive. Is that being done?
I don't have a specific program or anything targeted at that except just word of mouth. I've had students from the local colleges here, Unity College and University of Maine and University of New England, work on some of the data and have done various projects like looking at foraging distances. And I had one student who looked at the height of their flights, at least while they're in Maine, and what that means in terms of risk from wind turbines. And so there's like endless opportunities and endless questions to answer using the data. And I would talk to anybody who's willing to kind of, like you said, slice and dice the data and ask some questions and see if we can come up with some answers.
So how do they get a hold of you? Scott shared some links to you. You want to give your email address on it? Scott's on the phone, it looks like, so he may not be able to put it in the global chat, but
let's see, maybe I can type it in on a slide and then you guys
great.
Have it. So just give me 1 second here.
Brilliant idea.
I'll just put it
Good
here.
Use of technology.
There you go.
So were you always interested in birds and biology, or did you start out a law major and decided that birds were better? What's your background?
I always wanted to do some sort of science and wildlife. I'm going to share this. Let's see. I actually wanted to do marine biology first. And I went to a school in Western New York. So you can imagine there's not a lot of opportunities for marine biology in Western New York. So I kind of, oh boy, that's not, hold on. Sorry about that. There we go. You can just look at it there. So here it is, Danielle.D'Auria, no apostrophe in my email, at maine.gov.
Easy enough. Leave that up for there so people can
Sure.
copy it down. Hey, Scott, can you hear me? Nope, he's got it muted. Okay. All right. So we won't do that. So you always were interested in biology and
Yeah, and just during college, I had opportunities to work with birds with one of my professors, and then, just one thing led to another, and I got temporary jobs doing that, and I developed a love of birds probably when I was in college, and so very excited that I can get to continue doing that.
So what was the term for people that haven't had 3 generations in Maine?
They're from away. I'm from away, so.
From away. As I say, are you from away?
Yep. So, and even my kids who were born in Maine, they are not considered true Mainers. It has to be 3 generations or more. So,
There are places all over the country like that. There's places here where we live. If you're 3 generations, your grandkids might be considered sort of, maybe could be natives at some point at the end of their lives. Yeah.
right.
But it's not that they exclude you. It's just you get identified as other. So
Yeah. And I don't feel like I'm excluded. In fact, it's just often a funny, just a point of where people can chuckle.
a weird term of endearment, I suppose.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So what does the future hold?
What does the future hold? Well, right now we're on hold as far as putting out any more transmitters. We don't have any in hand, and we need a little more funding probably to do that. I didn't mention, once the transmitter is on a bird, we actually pay cell data fees. So it's like having a cell phone for each bird. And it's probably about $1,000 per year per bird in data fees. So it can add up over time, especially when the transmitters keep working for 6 years or more, which is awesome because we get so much data. But then it's like, got to keep paying.
what does the GPS transmitter cost?
They cost anywhere between $2,000 to $3,000, depending on the model and everything.
Yeah.
So
you definitely want to put that on a young bird who's safety conscious.
Yeah, right. I know. Well, and we tried a young bird one of the years. It was actually Easton's baby blue was a juvenile from that year, and you can tell by the plumage, but he didn't make it. And juveniles have a much lower survival rate.
Yeah.
So there's like a drawback to
2-year-old, like a 2. When I
yeah,
say
but we
a
never
young
know
bird,
their age. We don't know
Yeah.
any of their ages except if they're young or adult. So that's the tough thing.
So so maybe you can try. I mean, as I say, you could tag a bird and then as a juvenile and try and capture that bird again. But gee whiz, that would be, because they don't go back to the same spot every year.
Right. Especially juveniles might, like, they'll fledge from their nest and you don't know where they're going to end up nesting.
Right.
They're going to probably nest elsewhere potentially. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge to try to have a known age bird, but we'll get there because I think it would be great to follow one from, as close to the beginning as possible to see how their decisions change throughout their life.
Does your funding come from Maine game and fish licenses or National Science Foundation grants, all the above?
Yeah, so I didn't mention our funding actually. So for the transmitter project, initially, we got a grant from something called the Maine Outdoor Heritage Fund. But it also was supplemented by federal funding. We get something called Pittman-Robertson funds that goes towards Great Blue Herons are an eligible species for that money. So a lot of our funding is from the federal government as well as from our general fund and our license and fishing license and hunting sales and all that. So
to be clear,
there's kind of a hodgepodge of funding.
People knock hunters, but I want to point out that money from the Pittman-Robertson is based on an 11% excise tax on firearms and ammunition. So that is So that money is funded 100% by people who own firearms and
Yeah.
of all measure. So, there's a interesting, and I duck hunt. I've duck hunted before. Interesting. You're talking about birds going to the same spot. 2 years apart, my son shot a mallard duck that had been banded by a specific person at a specific boat launch ramp, and I think it was Minnesota. And 2 years later, 4 miles from the same spot, I got a banded green-winged teal that had been banded by the same person in the same spot 8 years
That's
later.
so neat. Yeah.
I mean, it just shows that parallelism of weirdly, and that's interspecies. That's not even
Right.
mallard ducks. That's a green-winged teal and a mallard duck. So it's just weird how interconnected we all are and how we all go to the same vacation spots, I guess.
Absolutely.
All right, so more data, trying to find new ways to look at the data and slice it and dice it and tease out things. And I guess the danger you face, hey, Scott, Danielle's email address is on the screen right now. The problem you face is drawing conclusions with what truly is a very small data set.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so we've explored other grants to get like a grad student on that we might be able to have like a larger sample size, but it didn't work out and we just haven't pursued anymore. So
okay.
Yeah.
So Scott, you see Danielle's address there?
Yeah.
Yep. There you
No, Danielle, this will probably result in more talks for you.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. I like getting the word out about what we're
Yeah. Well, you did a wonderful job for us, and I really appreciate it.
go. What time is it? Gee whiz, 5:18. Wow. Supper time
Yeah.
for you.
I could
We
keep
really
talking.
appreciate you.
I could keep talking about this. I love talking about it. So
Scott and I can talk.
Well, we'll have you come back sometime. So,
All right.
this stuff with Move Bank, I'm looking at the website right now. Just absolutely fantastic. It really makes you wish that you could, the average person could get involved somehow in tracking these things, and maybe there is volunteer programs, and we could talk about that in another program.
Yeah, well, Scott, we were talking about when you're on the phone with Buzz. It was the possibilities for citizen science, and she would welcome a science class from Bentonville, Arkansas, to reduce data, or to adopt. She had one.
Oh, sure.
One college student. I think this is fascinating.
Great.
The average height of the birds from their roost site to their foraging site in relationship to the impact of wind turbines.
Yeah.
Are they flying at 210 feet right where the blades of the wind turbines are? Or are they flying below the turbines or above the turbines? Because that helps inform better decision-making processes on where you locate or how you decide.
Or if somebody needs to go speak on behalf of protecting birds,
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, Scott, do you have any questions popped up? I know you got distracted on that call you had. You see any questions?
No, there were some comments here. The last comment was, these things still look like modern pterodactyls to me. That was Space Time with Robert.
Absolutely.
But I'll tell you that a lot of amateur astronomers are also interested in what birds do, and this possible connection with, migration cycling with the dark of the moon. It's a very interesting one. So
yeah, I'd love to look at that more.
I've got a couple of people that are teachers. I'm going to say, hey, here's something y'all need to explore with this data set, and do some real science in a high school or a college science class. And to tell you the reach we have a regular viewer, Tariq from the UAE. He had to drop off a few minutes ago, I think, but we truly have a global audience. We'll have people from the South Pacific. We'll have people from China, Japan, Australia. We've achieved a global audience for this. And we focus the show basically on North American birds because that's what we have access to photos of. But we welcome, again, photos from anywhere of any bird so we can talk about it and broaden our horizons as well. So I've really enjoyed this. Like I said, I geek out on this kind of data. It's just, it just fascinates me what y'all are doing. And the like we're in Birdcast, there's some nights more than 1 billion birds are flying on one night in the United States. On some nights, there's one bird flying 1,400 miles nonstop, and a great blue heron. It's just, it just makes me.
It's inspiring, and it fills you with wonderment. So
wonderment.
It's really cool.
That's it.
Absolutely.
That's it. So.
Yeah, and that's what I love about just looking at what these birds do, because every year I'm surprised by something they do, and it's just it's this constant source of wonder. So
well, that's the journey of discovery. That's what's on the other side of that mountain. That's what's over the horizon on the ocean. I'm going to sail out there and go see what's there and may never come back. For no one to disappear off the edge of the earth, so to speak. Although we don't know.
If you do, Kent, make sure you request some time off.
I'll try and get photographs of the edge of the earth if I get there. But we all it's that wonderment. I think that's what pushes. That's what is pushing science along, is wonderment and a sense of exploration and excitement. I suspect that's what pushed you into this. When you got you here, and you may not have thought you were going to be researching great blue heron migrations 15 years ago.
No.
But yeah. So that's just awesome. All right. Well, Danielle, anything you want? Closing comments?
No, I just want to thank you. I enjoyed this quite a bit, and hope others did too, and would love to hear from people.
They loved it. It was you gave us one of the most informative presentations I think we've ever had on the show. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great.
So, all right, good deal. So, Scott, wrap it up.
All right.
Send us out.
Here we go.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.
Yep. So for any of you that watch the program and have questions for Danielle, certainly get in touch with her. And if you're interested in trying citizen science with, in birding and ornithology, check in with her and she'll get you on the right path. You guys have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow for Focus on Astrophotography.